Hi, Angela. I just finished reading your book, The Win-Win Workplace, and let me start by telling you how much I appreciated it. So, I wanted to take a little bit of time to talk about some of the insights from your research and from your book, The Win-Win Workplace. So, in that book, you make the case that worker voice can't just mean surveys or a feedback, right? You argue that employees need a real say in shaping the decisions that impact their work and affect their day to day. And I want to start there and ask you, how do strategies that center that worker voice also benefit employers?
Thank you so much for having me and just for having this conversation. So, in the book, The Win Win Workplace, I really try to key on that worker voice can't just mean filling out a survey. What we saw in our research and the definition we gave is that workers had a real say in the things that shape their day-to-day
Mhm.
jobs. And when employees feel heard, they're bringing more energy, they're bringing more ideas, they're bringing more loyalty. And what we saw in our research is that when we found that present, that the employers were benefiting too. And I took give case studies of companies that are doing this well. And I mentioned in the book one about Jurgens Manufacturing. And they're just one employer, employee idea led to a whole new program for students with special needs. And what was so interesting in that is what it illuminated for the workplace Jurgens was a new pipeline of talent that hadn't come to their attention before. They saw productivity rise by 20%. And that's what I mean by a win-win. You had an employee who came up with a voice to address a real talent shortage need, an employer who was willing to look at non-traditional talent, hire them, train them, invest in them, and then what they saw were the returns on the other side of it.
Right, it makes a lot of sense. Workers who are doing the day-to-day work, who are closest to that work, are the ones who are likely to see some of the problems first, come up with innovative solutions, and all of that helps the business and the bottom line. I love that. One of the other things we think about a lot at National Skills Coalition is inclusion and how an inclusive workforce is a competitive workforce. And you've emphasized in your book that valuing the richness of workers' full identities, not just the role they play at work, right? But the set of experiences and backgrounds they bring can really unlock potential. I'm wondering if you can talk a little about what that looked like in the workplaces that you've researched.
Yeah, and so we looked at over 1,700 employers. So some of them were Fortune 500, some of them were private equity backed, mid-sized businesses. We also looked in small and medium-sized businesses. And what we saw demonstrating the businesses that we called a win-win workplace is that there was an acknowledgement that these employees are more than just a job description, that they brought, lived experiences outside, family responsibility, other talents that they may have gained that might not be on their resume. And all of this could be brought to bear on behalf of not only that employee, but the company. So what that looks like in practice is thinking about, flexible benefits. And so a lot of companies will talk about caregiving benefits. What we saw in some of these win-win workplaces, they went beyond just childcare and they thought about elder care. For example,
Hmm.
we're in a 5-generation workplace right now. They thought about benefits for people who just graduated college. So thinking about tuition reimbursement or assistance or a loan payback. They also thought about people who are just starting out with families. So they did benefits like giving down payments on loans or helping with the down payment or deposit for apartments, addressing basic needs like transportation. And so what we saw is that when companies actually did this, that they found that they were unlocking savings in a couple different ways. One that we did a big study on in the book around transportation as a benefit, a company Zelo saw with a large manufacturer that one, they were able to get people to jobs in manufacturing plants that were not best served by public transportation. They saw by offering transportation as a benefit that there were a higher productivity. And then they saw higher retention. And I think the win-win that we saw about it is that originally they had thought about this transportation for frontline workers, hourly wage workers. But when it was offered, they saw all employees at all levels take advantage of this. And so as a culture, people got to know each other across, I think, hierarchies that you'd see across roles. And really what it's led is to really building a community. And what we're seeing on average with companies that take this on a large scale, Fortune 500, they're doing a savings of around 100 to $200 million a year in terms of reduced turnover and increased productivity.
Wow, that's so interesting. And I mean, I think you lifted up something that we try to build into our design on public policies, which is when we focus on people's specific needs that come with their whole person, their full identity, we often come up with solutions and benefits that benefit us all, right? Also, really appreciate the way that thinking about the whole person is helping businesses with retention. And something we're trying to do at National Skills Coalition is making sure that that starts in training as well. And so, just like you mentioned, being able to have that flexibility with care, whether it's child care or elder care, being able to have that stable and reliable and affordable transportation is really important for people in the workforce. It's also really important for students and workers who are trying to go to college, go to work, and juggle their family in between all of that. And so we're advocating with our business leaders, United Partners with national networks, coalitions for investments, public investments, and public policies to support workers as they go through training as whole people as well. Your book advocates for the importance of skills. And in particular, you had case studies in that book that I really appreciated that showed how skills focused approaches can expand opportunities for workers and widen the talent pool for employers. And we know that employers are looking for a skilled and diverse workforce in this century to remain economically competitive. So I want to connect back to the other two ideas we just discussed about worker voice and recognizing the whole person. How does skills-based hiring, skills-based advancement, skills-based training help with those other two things or build on those other two things, worker voice and inclusion?
Well, the big thing that we saw when we were looking at the companies in the books and the ones that we call win-win, the ones that we're really thinking about beyond a resume or a credential, how else might we understand if person is a fit within our
Mhm.
organization? And really what they centered on, what is the job to be done and what can this person do? Not what credential does this person have. And with that wide aperture, just like the Jergens example, the CEO there, Jack Shoren says, we have a big tent mentality. Instead of screening people out, we're trying to really screen them in.
Mhm.
And in places like in sectors like manufacturing, where again, there's a lot of unfilled jobs, that's really important. But what we're seeing because they're doing that they're also having a talent savings. And so having this kind of big tent or open screening people in, it opens doors for millions of workers who are skilled through alternative routes, which we call stars. I wrote about them in a case study that they did it with Intel.
Mhm.
And they did a survey and they understood that, on paper, it didn't look like they had the pipeline of talent that they would need to fill this complete plant.
Mhm.
And so what they did was proactively partnered with Ohio's community colleges. They built certification programs. They did this in 6 months. And what they thought about was really training it for the lived realities of people. Most people, if they have familial obligations, what I call the new majority student, they can't stop out for a year or 2 years to go back to school. So they thought in short burst programs, how could there be stackable credits and training so that people could over time get the skills that they would need to be employed? And what we saw with that is giving that flexibility, making sure that they were partnering with community colleges, making sure they were taking actual Intel employees and working side by side with these community college instructors to make sure that the curriculum was just in time, is that they begin getting a pipeline of talent, not only for Intel, but for other of, again, their suppliers who are in the area. And so what we're seeing when we talk about this win-win, it's yes, that's a win for the employee because you're doing skills first hiring, you're not going by just what's on a resume. It's also a win for the employers because what we've seen that these employers who are doing skills first hiring, because they're identifying sometimes overlooked talent, they have talent savings. They had higher retention and they had higher loyalty. And so when you think about those costs and cost savings, it becomes a win not only for that employee, but also for the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's exactly those kind of industry partnerships that bring together employers, community colleges, oftentimes community-based organizations, all around the same table to develop that talent pipeline that we love to see at National Skills Coalition and oftentimes advocate to have public investments in. So really appreciate your book, really appreciate how it brings to life so many of the policy ideas that we put forward on a day-to-day basis and tells the stories of why these investments matter for both workers and employers. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation, Angela.
And Brooke, thank you so much. I think the last piece I'd just like to share, the training that you offer is key. In the book, we wrote a chapter on taking frontline managers to frontline leaders. We saw that the companies that actually trained supervisors and managers on this approach actually brought them in and start shifting some of the mental models so that managers, supervisors, they're also open to these approaches. And we're sharing with them why this is not only good for the people who report to them, but also critical to the business.
Love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brooke.